Hi, everyone. So my name is Fatima Valencia, and today I'm going to be presenting about I'm going to be giving a presentation about the developmental assessment of young children, or the DAYC as it's more commonly known. I do want to point out though, however, that I am giving a presentation on the first edition of this assessment because there is a second edition, which I again am not doing. I am very much doing the first assessment. So let's get into it. So what exactly does this assessment do, or what is it used for? The DAYC basically measures how well young children are developing. And when I say young children, I'm usually referring to children that are from 0 to 48 months, or like from 0 to 4 years old. So what's really good about this assessment is that it measures five main areas of development. It measures their cognition, communication, social emotional development, physical development, and their adaptive behavior. Each area comes with its own subtest. And what I mean, say subtests, I mean that because like the test is usually administered in like an observational setting, the observers usually have a checklist of behaviors to look out for each area. And each area of development has its own set of checklists for behaviors to look out for. This assessment is used to determine if a child is developing typically as they should or atypically. You know, maybe they're either like a little bit or maybe even a lot behind what at like the mark that they should be. And this assessment would be really good to help identify in what areas they're not developing typically. Because because it measures multiple aspects, it's really good at determining like the strengths or like the weaknesses of a child. It's really used to document progress and like, to see if they're really like hitting those milestones. Usually this assessment is administered like in a natural setting, usually like either at home or like in classrooms to really see like how the children would behave normally. And then after the observations are met, then the researchers typically are supposed to interview the parents or caregivers of the children just to see if they've noticed any weird or good behaviors that the child might be exhibiting. So reliability. So while I was like researching the assessment, I found like a lot of good information on it. Looking specifically at reliability, a lot of my articles mentioned that it had a very high degree of reliability, despite it being observation based. It was actually very consistent. Because of this, it means that the assessment had good inter-rater reliability. It had about 95% inter-rater reliability, which is actually really good. What this means is that since it's very like observation based, the researchers were more or less observing the same behaviors in children when administering the assessment. During my research, I also found that the reliability coefficients range from 0.90 to 0.99, which are extremely good. That's extremely high reliability for this kind of test. And basically what that means is that yes, this assessment is actually really reliable. It's really good at observing behaviors within children and making it so that different people see those same behaviors within like the same child. Now let's move on to validity. So while I was like researching, a lot of my research showed that it had like high levels of content and construct validity. Content validity basically means how well the assessment measures the behaviors it's meant to be measured. In this case, it'd be like the five areas I mentioned earlier. So social, emotional, communication, cognitive, physical, and adaptive. The research also showed criterion related validity, which was about 0.41 to 0.61, which are decent scores. They're not like super high or as high as I would like them to be, but they're all right. They're okay. They're valid, as one might say. Um, this just shows how accurately the assessment measures the outcome it was meant to measure. For the criterion predictive validity correlation coefficients, basically this just means that the results of the assessments are indicative of future results. A way to measure this is by testing it against another assessment that measures the same thing. In this case, they measured it. So the results were they got a 0.48 for the DAYC, which is again the assessment that I'm presenting on right now, and the revised Giselle, and a 0.57 for the DAYC and the Battelle Development Inventory. Um, so because it came up with like two different scores for the two different measurements that it like went up against, and but they were positive relationships, as you can see, which is good because it means that they're both measuring like the same thing in like the same way. But again, the scores are 0.48 and 0.57, which means it has like a decent relationship to them. And again, it's not super strong. I would have preferred it to be like a little bit stronger just to have like better validity, but overall it's not bad. So in terms of validity, I'd say that it's okay. Again, not super high validity scores, but they're decent, which is still completely valid. Now, in terms of like real world application, I did see like a lot of strengths and weaknesses for the assessment and like how it's used typically in like the real world for strengths. I did see that it was more observation based, which is really good because it means that the child would like be behaving normally in like their natural setting, like I said, either like in their homes or their classrooms. And this means that there's less chance for disruptions and you have a more accurate representation of what kind of behaviors the subjects or the participants, sorry, might be exhibiting, how they might be behaving. There's also little test error because of the way that it's administered and because you normally have like a lot of researchers watching, observing, it sort of lessens the impact of the whole observation based or the score kind of like error that might be going on. So another strength that I saw was that it is the tests per for the domains, the checklists I mentioned earlier are standardized. It is like the same checklist each time the assessment is administered, which is which makes it standardized. So because everyone's always looking at the same behaviors, they're always getting like similar it's always um it's it well it makes it standardized so that it makes it consistent across applications. And it's also extremely expansive because it covers 5 different domains. It does have more than a few weaknesses though, because it is so the checklists themselves are standardized, but the actual item administration doesn't actually come with instructions. So it doesn't actually tell the observers how to like administer the test, which makes some sense because like I said, it mostly is observation based, but it just means it's not standardized. So it does create like a little room for error. There's like I said, so areas for error, content, time, and score. The scorer could either like come with their own biases or the scorers might like not exactly interpret the different like the same behavior. They might interpret the same behaviors differently, which again creates like a little more room for error. There's also no basal or ceiling limits, which again, this isn't necessarily a weakness. It's just something that I noticed when I was like doing my research. A lot of the articles mentioned that it doesn't have like these kinds of like limits. So it's not that it necessarily makes it like difficult to see like the behavior. It's just something that they sort of noted. But one of I guess the weaknesses are that it's kind of more like self-report, especially the interview portion. When talking to the parents, they mostly realize that the parents could be like skewed in favor of their child because they won't want to like give them a bad score. So it might just like they might have like their own biases. Conclusion though, is this a good assessment? Is it valid? Does it have good reliability? I'm gonna start from the bottom up. Does it have good reliability? Absolutely. I think that especially with all the research that I went through, I think it has really good reliability and it actually had like really good scores in that part. Is it valid? Yes, but I would like the validity scores to have been a bit higher than what they actually were. I think it definitely has room for improvement. And because of that, I actually wouldn't say it's a good assessment. I'd say at most it's a decent assessment. Just because, like I said, it does have like a lot of issues and like room for error that I just really hesitate to say that's a good assessment. I do think that because of this, there is a second edition, as I mentioned earlier, to this assessment, and I think that that second assessment, because I did actually research that one too, that second assessment has a lot of it sort of it addresses some of the concerns I had for this one, and I think it is a slightly better version of the assessment. But yeah, overall, I think this assessment is like decent at best. Would hesitate to call it a good assessment. But yeah, that pretty much concludes my presentation. Again, here are my sources. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope you all learned something today about this assessment. So, thank you.